I'm going to make a very simple sourdough bread starter. I've got my whole wheat flour here. All I use is whole wheat flour. And I'm just have a measuring cup. I'm going to try to get 1 cup in here of plain flour. I say try because this is going to be a little awkward. I don't have all my utensils together. I'm off the grid in a home I'm building myself, so I don't have everything unpacked yet. There's a ½ cup. Let's pour that in there. Just any Tupperware container will do. Alright, there's a ½ cup. Now, I need a ½ cup of warm water. So, bear with me while I pour that in. I'll be right back with a ½ cup. Sorry, I meant to say 1 cup of warm water. And simply pour that in. And most of the work is done. This is the beginning. Now all I do is stir that up. Should be a bit watery when I'm done. And I'm just going to stir that up thoroughly and set this aside at room temperature between 70 and 80 degrees. And the natural yeast in the flour will start to grow and reproduce, and you'll start to see bubbles in this. Now this is a process of multiple days, so I'm going to set this aside, and every 24 hours you feed it. And to feed it, you take out half of the contents of the container and add a ½ cup of flour and a ½ cup of water, and you just continue doing that until it starts bubbling rapidly and foaming at the top. And at that point, your starter mixture is ready for use to make a fine sourdough bread, which I will then be doing. I'm really anxious to do this and excited about this. I can't wait to start baking sourdough bread in my antique tin oven on the tiny house wood stove. It's going to be really cool, just like the old-fashioned days. Plain old simple recipe, the old-fashioned wood stove and an antique tin oven. I'm excited. Can't wait to try it out. So anyway, I'll continue mixing this, and pretty much it's done, but I'm just going to mix a little bit more. Make sure I get all the flour mixed in there properly. In with the water. You see it's a very wet, gooey consistency. And now I got this container at the dollar store, and I got this specifically because you don't want a sealed container or it will blow the lid off. Once the yeast starts bubbling, it will blow the lid off and it's going to give off gases, and you don't want a airtight container. And I did not like the idea of poking holes in a nice Tupperware container or a glass mason jar lid or whatever. So what I did is I purchased from the dollar store a container with a pop-open breather hole. How cool is that? It's absolutely perfect. It was $1. And if you want to keep your food closed, this is actually made for microwaving. And it's just perfect. I just popped it open, and I've got the breather hole so the gases can escape from my sourdough bread mixture. Or I should say sourdough bread starter mix. And that's what it really is. So I'm just going to put the lid on, make sure the breather hole is open, and let that sit. We'll be back tomorrow. My sourdough bread starter mix is really fermenting happily right now, and it's time to feed it. Look at that. This is after only 2 days. This is I did it on one day. I started this on Saturday. Sunday I did not feed it. I was bad. I did not feed it, but I intentionally did not feed it. I wanted to see what happens. And here is Monday. Look at that. Smells weird. All I can say is it smells weird. So now it's time to measure in. I have to take out half of this and discard it and measure in another ½ cup of flour and a ½ cup of water. And from now on, for the next couple days, I have to do that every day. But I think it's going very, very fast here, and I won't have to do it very much. So let me get a container to discard it off into. I'm just going to scoop that off. Oh, look at that. It's really doughy looking. And there's some water separated off in the bottom. I do believe they say you're supposed to stir it. Just not really much smell. It's actually almost a disgusting thought to have something fermenting and rotting on your countertop that you're going to use for cooking, but that is the natural way, the old way of doing things. Boy, that's really bubbling nice. Really good. So, I'm going to attempt to get half of this out of here without making a mess. I'll be back in a second. I've got a ½ cup flour, and then I'm going to measure a ½ cup water. Be right there in a second. Just pouring out my water. Okay, ½ cup water. Pour that right on in there, and then I'll mix it up, and we'll just let that sit for a while. My flour out of my way. Stir that up well, and then we'll let that sit for another day, and then feed it again. See, now the yeast, the natural yeast from the air, is actually growing in my Tupperware container. I'm just going to feed off this flour I'm giving it and continue to grow a yeast colony. And I'm figuring at the rate it's going, in another day or so, I'm going to have a good sourdough starter mix. And I'll be able to bake a loaf of bread the old-fashioned way. All natural. No added artificial ingredients. I'm actually using whole wheat flour as well, by the way. This is unbleached whole wheat flour. So this is as natural and good as it gets. Okay. I'm going to cover that and let it sit for another day, and we'll be back tomorrow. I just fed my sourdough starter mix, and this is the 5th day, and it's really bubbling pretty heavily even now, right after I just fed it. And you can see the bubbles forming even now. So it's bubbling pretty quickly. It was earlier, it was right up to the top of the container, and then somehow it burst and it flattened itself out. But it is really bubbling. I mean, look, I just stirred it and it's really bubbling nicely already. So it's really active and live, and I bet tomorrow it'll be ready for use. So it's good stuff. Now, I licked off the spoon after stirring, and it was sour. Now I get the idea why they call it a sourdough recipe. It is really sour. I was just curious, and I tasted it. Well, my sourdough starter looks sort of disgusting. The gooey, runny mix got really watery, but you can see the bubbly foam in it, and it is alive, so it is doing well. And I will show you how I have tested it. I have a miniature bit of bread sitting on top of the wood stove, warming up and rising. I just took a tiny little bit. I did not measure anything. I just took a little bit of my sourdough starter mix and put it into a glass container with some flour and water, and I'll go over and show you that in a minute. So there's the finished end results of the sourdough starter. Now I'm going to feed this one more time and then put it outside. Outdoors is my refrigerator because it's winter. And I will put it outside where it'll stay until it's needed next time. So actually it's bubbling nicely as I watch. I just saw some bubbles over here just growing. So it is alive and well. And now what you would do is just keep it refrigerated until needed. And then you will pull it out, and I'll show you that in a separate video, how you make your sourdough bread. But let me take you over to the test dough, which is rising nicely, and show you that. Now, here's my wood stove in my tiny house on wheels, and there's my antique tin oven on top of the wood stove. So what I have here, if you see the ladder in the background, those of you who have not followed my videos daily, I'm building a tiny house on wheels, and it's not finished. I have a wood stove here, and on top of that I have an antique tin oven, which is literally a baking oven that sits on top of the wood stove, and it works. And on top of that I have a little area where I can put, it's a warming spot for warming, keeping something, dishes warm, or perfect for rising bread. And I just simply, without measuring or anything, put some flour. I put some starter mix in here, probably about it to here, and then I put in some flour and water and stirred it up, and then I just simply put it up on here to rise with the lid on it to keep the moisture in. And you can see the bubbles forming in it very nicely. It is rising very well. I'm going to let it sit a little bit longer and rise a little bit more. It should probably double or triple in size. Might even reach the top of the container. And when it's done, I will pull it out and put it inside my oven here and bake it. And that's my little test bread, my little test sourdough bread. Just an experiment to see how well it worked, and I see it's rising well, so it is certainly doing its job. So there's the sourdough starter mix and experimental bread. Now I just added some more flour and water and stirred this in nicely, and you can see it looks so much nicer after you've mixed it up and stirred it back in. So there it is. That's ready to go outside, and as a normal household we'll put it in the fridge. I'll be putting it outside. You can see it's bubbling even now. It's already bubbling happily and eating up the sugars in the flour. So good stuff. Can't wait to bake a real loaf of bread. I'll be doing that in a separate video. So there's the sourdough starter.